Good morning, good afternoon, colleagues. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Louise Baker. I am the Managing Director of the Global Mechanism at UNCCD, and it's my pleasure to kick off this public-private dialogue on policy priorities and collaboration on agriculture for COP17 and beyond. So I'll get straight to it. Colleagues, distinguished participants, representatives of parties, the private sector, and members of the wider UNCCD community. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to this dialogue organised by Business for Land regarding the sustainable management of agricultural lands and regenerative landscapes. The timing of this discussion is particularly important, and I hope you know that. As we move closer to 2030, achieving LDN will require action at scale. There's no single stakeholder that can deliver this alone. Governments, businesses, financial institutions, farmers, civil society, and international organizations all have a really important, essential actually, and complementary roles to play. So recognizing this, parties to UNCCD have strengthened the mandate for engaging the private sector in the implementation of the convention, and in doing that, creating Business for Land initiative. At COP16, that's the one in Riyadh, parties reaffirmed the importance of further developing the convention's private sector engagement strategy, and that's to encourage private sector action, investment, financing flows, and technology transfer. And so today's webinar is very much part of that wider effort. At COP16, parties requested the Secretariat, in collaboration with the Food and Agricultural Organization and other relevant partners, to provide guidance on sustainable land use, responsible governance, and the prevention and reversal of agricultural land degradation to support Decision 19 of COP16. That's the agricultural lands decision coming out of Riyadh. The global mechanism then invited the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, together with a broad coalition of businesses and ecosystem partners, to develop a set of recommendations from the private sector perspective. The objective, it's not to establish a negotiated position or to advocate specific policy outcomes, but rather to provide parties with a coherent and practical articulation of how the private sector views opportunities to accelerate sustainable land, soil and water management and land restoration. These recommendations can serve as one input into the reports being prepared under Decision 6 and 19 of COP16, alongside contributions from parties, technical organisations and other stakeholders. They represent an evolution of how the Convention is responding to its mandate on private sector engagement. We're proposing, perhaps for the first time, a structured mechanism to bring together a unified private sector perspective that can inform ongoing discussions under the Convention and provide practical insights. So, today's discussions are not about endorsing a particular set of recommendations. Rather, it's an opportunity to engage in a dialogue, to better understand where governments and businesses see common ground, where challenges remain, and how stronger public-private collaboration can support the Convention. I hope that today's exchange will be interactive and constructive. I encourage any parties who are on the line to really share your perspective, challenge the assumptions that we're hearing about today, and consider how these recommendations may, or of course may not, help inform national and international efforts. With that, I'd like to thank all of our speakers and participants for joining us, and I look forward to a really rich discussion. I'm especially honoured to welcome the two co-chairs of today's dialogue, Dr. Claudia Hieper, UNCCD National Focal Point at Germany's Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, and Mr. Jean Coadieu, UNCCD National Focal Point at Côte d'Ivoire's Ministry of Environment, Social Development and Ecological Transition. Claudia, thank you so much for joining us today. It's my great pleasure to invite you to take the floor for your opening remarks. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Louise, and hello to everyone, dear party representatives, dear private sector colleagues, dear UNCCD colleagues, dear audience. As Germany, we are delighted to co-host this webinar together with my colleague from Côte d'Ivoire to facilitate a dialogue between companies from agriculture and adjacent value chains and the UNCCD parties on those policy recommendations, how from the private sector, how private sector contributions to sustainable land management and agricultural landscapes can be scaled. So I think we all know there is the 2030 deadline for land degradation neutrality. That's coming very fast. But the reality is that roughly 25 to up to 40% of the global land is degraded, and that over 60% of this degradation occurs on agricultural land. So there is really a sense of urgency felt by also more and more actors in the private sector. And it becomes very obvious that isolated restoration projects are not enough. We really need a systemic shift in the incentives that drive land use decisions so that sustainable land management becomes the default rather than the exception. So there's also more and more becomes obvious that there's also an economic imperative, because it's really, if we look beyond short-term benefits, there is the business case. There is actually a core business need also to secure in the mid and long term resilient supply chains, responding to market and regulatory demand, and building future-oriented, profitable and resilient business models. Because, for example, Germany, we have are leading the Economics of Land Degradation initiative, which has showed clearly that the cost of inaction is extremely high. So in that sense, we really have to come together. There's a huge financing need. So also all the NDN targets cannot be reached without substantial investments from the private sector. And I think it's really good to see that many companies are also realizing this, and that more and more public and private dialogue is taking place. So we as Germany are happy to support this process that is led by the UNCCD and with the World Business Council on Sustainable Development. And we warmly welcome the World Business Council for Sustainable Development and more than 50 business and ecosystem partners have developed these recommendations for parties. And it will be really interesting to reflect on them, to discuss and to use them. But it's not just a one-off exercise. So we are really also strong supporters of the Business for Land initiative from UNCCD as a key platform to systematically engage companies and financial institutions in sustainable land and water management, supporting them to manage risks tied to land degradation and drought and seize opportunities. So I think it's really, when we talk about adopting sustainable land management practices, it's across agricultural value chains, then of course it's the whole value chain. It's aligning production, sourcing, finance, and markets behind regenerative outcomes. So here we are, and I want to keep it short. We have those recommendations that are tabled, and I personally think the different focus areas that we will be looking at are very well set, with a focus in the priority area on a conducive policy environment, with a second priority area on de-risking and cost-benefit sharing, and the third priority area on frameworks for accountability, target setting, and impact measurement to guide investment decisions. So we also really would like to encourage other party representatives to look at those recommendations, to maybe also use them and reflect on how can we use them for national implementation and at the national level, upscaling of these investments, but also how to reflect on them that now that we have the UNCCD COP17 ahead of us and beyond. And I can assure that as Germany, we want to continue to be a premium partner in the next phase of these efforts. And we believe it's very important to have this systematic dialogue between public and private sector, and to align our language and really come together, not just on certain occasions, but really to look at the barriers and try to systematically address them. So with that, thank you very much. And I look forward to fruitful discussions. But before that, I hand over to my second co-chair from Côte d'Ivoire. Thank you.
Merci, Claudia, pour m'avoir passé la parole. Tout d'abord, mesdames et messieurs de l'UNCCD, mesdames et messieurs du secteur privé, mesdames et messieurs, tous les invités à ce forum, mesdames et messieurs les points focaux. Nous tenons à dire un grand merci à l'UNCCD qui a bien voulu organiser cette séance pour nous édifier encore sur la nécessité d'impliquer durablement le secteur privé dans la restauration et la protection de la ressource terre, une ressource qui aujourd'hui est très menacée. Nous tenons franchement à vous dire merci aussi au nom du ministre de l'Environnement et de la Transition écologique, M. Abou Bamba, d'avoir nominé la Côte d'Ivoire comme champion aux côtés de l'Allemagne. Donc, comme je le disais, c'est un réel honneur pour nous, la Côte d'Ivoire, de prendre part à cette rencontre et de prendre aussi la parole. Car le Business for Land est une initiative qui traduit une conviction forte, celle de la restauration des terres, et ne pourra réussir sans une implication active et ambitieuse du secteur privé. Aujourd'hui, nous faisons face à un grand défi au niveau mondial. C'est la dégradation des terres qui menace notre sécurité alimentaire, notre sécurité aussi, sécurité à proprement parler, qui menace nos ressources en eau, notre diversité biologique, nos économies rurales et la résilience de nos populations face au changement climatique. Mais ce défi également est une formidable opportunité pour nous tous. Une opportunité de transformer nos modèles agricoles, de créer des emplois durables, des emplois verts, de renforcer les chaînes de valeur et d'investir dans des paysages productifs, résilients et inclusifs. Les consultations conduites dans le cadre du processus Business for Land démontrent clairement que les entreprises sont prêtes à investir davantage dans les paysages régénératifs. Elles demandent cependant un cadre propice, et c'est normal, des politiques cohérentes, des systèmes de suivi crédibles, des mécanismes de partage des risques et des partenariats publics-privés plus solides. La Côte d'Ivoire, mon pays, partage pleinement cette vision. Notre ambition est de créer un environnement propice où les investissements privés contribuent directement à la neutralité en matière de dégradation des terres, tout en générant de la valeur économique, sociale et environnementale. Nous croyons que les gouvernements ne doivent pas agir seuls. Nous en sommes persuadés. Les entreprises, les producteurs, les investisseurs, les collectivités locales, les chercheurs et la société civile, tous doivent construire ensemble les solutions. Le rôle de l'État est d'instaurer la confiance en développant des politiques prévisibles, en facilitant l'accès aux données, en renforçant les systèmes de suivi et de transparence et en mettant en place des mécanismes innovants de financement qui réduisent les risques liés aux investissements durables. Pour sa part, la Côte d'Ivoire poursuit ses efforts afin d'intégrer la gestion durable des terres dans ses politiques nationales, de renforcer les partenariats avec le secteur privé et de promouvoir des investissements qui concilient développement économique, restauration des terres et résilience climatique. La COP17 qui aura lieu très bientôt en Mongolie doit marquer une nouvelle étape. Une étape où nous ne parlons plus seulement de collaboration, mais de co-construction. Plus seulement de promesses, mais d'investissements concrets. Plus seulement d'ambition, mais d'actions mesurables au bénéfice des populations et des générations futures. J'invite donc l'ensemble des partenaires présents, surtout le secteur privé, présent aujourd'hui, à considérer la Côte d'Ivoire comme un partenaire engagé pour développer ensemble des solutions innovantes, mobiliser les investissements et accélérer la transition vers des paysages régénératifs. En unissant les politiques publiques, les investissements privés et l'innovation, nous pouvons restaurer les terres, nous pouvons renforcer nos économies et bâtir un avenir plus durable pour tous. C'est sur ces points que je vous dis merci, bonne rencontre et que de cette rencontre sortent des recommandations assez fortes pour constituer un vivier où l'on va s'imprégner pour la restauration des terres, pour un développement meilleur de nos politiques en matière de NDT. Merci.
And thank you to our two co-hosts, to Claudia from Germany and Jean from Côte d'Ivoire for that welcoming. My name is Victoria Crawford. I'm a director at the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. And by means of introduction, we are a business membership organization. We have around 250 members who are typically large multinational companies, and around 50 of those work with us on agriculture and sustainable land use. So we're incredibly excited to be part of this process, and would really like to thank the UNCCD team, as well as Germany and Côte d'Ivoire as the co-hosts of this, and champions of the work, for the opportunity to work together. And we really see it as a chance for a new form of collaboration. So yeah, huge thanks for that. I think before we go on to the next bit, I think we have a antitrust slide. Yes, the agenda. So just to give a bit of a run through of the day, I am going to share some comments around why this is so important from a private sector perspective, and hand over to my colleague Tess, who will present the consultation approach, how we've gone about this, and what the key findings are. And then we'll spend around an hour having a moderated discussion, where we have a number of the participants in the consultation have joined us in the call, so we look forward to their perspectives. But we're also very eager to hear from the countries as well. So we would very much welcome your feedback, comments, questions as part of the discussion. And then we will finish with some next steps. And to the next slide, please. Yeah, quick housekeeping instructions. As mentioned, it's designed to be an interactive dialogue, so please do raise your hand if you'd like to come into the discussion. We'd very much welcome inputs. And the next one, and this is a reminder of WBCSD's antitrust policy. So we share this in all of our meetings, and it's given the focuses on business actions and bringing companies together to talk about sustainability solutions. This just reminds us that we will not be talking about commercially sensitive topics such as pricing and bid strategies. So we'll make sure the discussion stays away from those. We can probably put the slides down for a second. So why are businesses so interested in this topic of sustainable agricultural lands? We've heard a really nice framing from Claudia and from Jean from the country perspective about the importance of land degradation, and that 40% of land globally is degraded, with an additional 100 million hectares becoming degraded each year. Under business as usual, we could see over 90% of land being degraded by 2050. And for companies, this is a huge risk. It means that their supply chains are facing increasing physical risks that really undermine their business. So across all of our work, we work with companies to support them to invest in a new business as usual, shifting to a more sustainable approach. Amongst companies, we are seeing growing investments and growing investments in regenerative landscapes that can avoid, reduce, and reverse land degradation. So under the action agenda on regenerative landscapes, we have seen commitments from businesses towards $9 billion worth of investments by 2030, covering 210 million hectares over 110 countries and reaching 12 million farmers. And this, really, I think what we want to emphasize is that there's a shared agenda here for businesses. Tackling land degradation and investing in sustainable land management is a huge and growing business imperative. This is because companies recognize that they need to invest both in terms of regenerative agriculture and investments on farm, but also investing in the wider landscapes. So investing in nature-based solutions beyond their value chains, because their value chains are highly dependent on the wider ecosystems and connected to the wider communities that these touch. And so for us, we've approached this from what we're describing as regenerative landscapes. But this really means investments on farm as well as the wider landscape level investments that can provide productive agriculture and land use systems that are regenerating rather than depleting natural resources. So we're very keen to hear your reactions to this. I'll hand over to my colleague Tess to share in more detail how we've approached this, but just to emphasize, like, we really see this as the start of a dialogue and are really, really excited to hear from you how this lands, which parts resonate, where you see opportunities to work together more closely. So very much looking forward to the dialogue over the coming hour or so. Over to you, Tess.
Thank you, Victoria, and hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be on the call with you today. So my name's Tess, and I work in our Agriculture and Food program at the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, and I'm going to present to you an overview of the process, the participants, and the business-backed policy recommendations. If we move to the next slide, I'll just highlight that WBCSD was really pleased to accept the call from UNCCD to lead global consultations with businesses, where we've really taken a targeted approach to engage agricultural businesses and, as discussed, those from adjacent land-based value chains, with the goal to elevate business contributions to sustainable land management. And our objective of this process was really to bring businesses together to build a shared understanding of not only the key barriers, but the opportunities for investment in regenerative landscapes. and to really identify the policy areas that can unlock that investment. So our consultation included 55 businesses from agriculture and food and adjacent sectors. And this also included 18 partner organizations. This is from WBCSD's own global network partners, as well as farmer groups, finance networks. And we built the consultation outputs over 7 workshops with 3 written feedback rounds. And through this process, we saw high business interest, which congregates in the recommendations that I'll share shortly. And so these outcomes, the outcomes of this process is really an aligned and universal agenda that can be applied in different contexts and in different ways, depending on national priorities, and which I will shortly share. So just on the next slide, this is a high-level overview of some of the organizations involved on screen now, so that you can see some of that representation. And if we move on to the next slide, I'll give a bit of a high-level overview of our findings and then go through in a bit more detail. So on the findings, and Louise highlighted at the beginning of the call that part of this was also understanding the key challenges that are being faced. And so we highlight some of those key areas on screen now. So what we know is that businesses are investing in regenerative landscapes. However, fragmented and misaligned policy and regulatory frameworks are continuing to limit investment at the speed and scale required for this necessary transition. So on screen, you'll see those 3 barriers. The first is around incoherent, unstable, and complex policies, which is raising compliance costs and reducing confidence. And this, we find, really makes it harder for companies to invest in long-term projects and actually goes away to disincentivizing action on regenerative landscapes. The second is around misaligned incentives and ineffective risk sharing, which we find hinders investment with uneven value distribution across the system, where we found that this limited access to finance and fragmented coordination really constrains investment. And the third bucket to highlight is that inconsistent metrics, fragmented standards, and siloed data systems reducing the credibility and usability of sustainability information. And we find that this is really limiting risk assessment and the efficient allocation of capital. And so overcoming these business challenges presents an opportunity for governments and businesses to deliver on interconnected business and global priorities. And so these barriers directly track against how we framed the policy asks. And so they'll appear shortly in 3 buckets. So in terms of how we've included the recommendations, they track against the barriers in 3 areas. So the first is around creating a coherent and stable policy environment. The second is around building a long-term vision on financing the transition and really creating conditions that de-risk investment and share costs and benefits fairly. The third is around strengthening trusted frameworks for accountability, target setting, and impact measurement, with the objective of this process to really, for businesses and policymakers to work together to co-design solutions. On the next slides are a set of the more detailed asks, and so we can go through those, and I'll touch on a few of the key ones, and you can read on screen, and we'll be sharing the recommendations in full following this call. So more depth in terms of the first policy area, which is about coherent and stable policy environment. So a stable and coherent policy environment really promotes long-term investment strategies, reduces complexity for business, and helps investors assess performance with confidence. Coherence is really needed across policy and regulation, as well as finance and investment and data and reporting. So one of the examples that you can see here is about creating entry points for business participation in national and international programs, empowering companies to contribute to not only the land degradation neutrality, but also NDCs, MBSAPs, and targets through nested business initiatives. If we move on to the next policy area 2, which is about building a long-term vision on financing the transition and creating conditions to de-risk investments and share costs and benefits fairly. And so this policy area is all about strengthening systems that enable the sharing of costs, risks, and benefits fairly between public and private sector actors, and specifically across landscapes and value chains. And we see this as really bolstering regenerative landscape investments to ensure commercial capital goes to where it's needed the most. And in this section, these asks that you see on screen now, we find that it's really essential to deploy capital to rural communities and land stewards at the forefront of the transition, and to really pave the way for healthy and resilient landscapes. So within here, one of the ones that I wanted to call out in terms of de-risking investments and supporting cost sharing is around expanding and strengthening subsidy and incentive programs, including payments for ecosystem services, as well as supporting collective action, so co-investment and cost-sharing mechanisms, which can be done by engaging with and championing investment coalitions, such as the Landscape Accelerator Brazil, or coordinating pipelines and public-private co-investment through relevant accelerator programs like the Resilient Agriculture Investment for Net Zero Land Degradation, RAISE. If we move on to the third policy area that we'll share before entering discussion. So our third area is all about strengthening trusted frameworks for accountability, target setting, and impact measurement to guide investment decisions. And so here, the policy asks really relate to strengthening accountability, widespread adoption of clear and interoperable science-based metrics, and we really see this disclosure element as really key to ensure disclosure of material, climate, nature, and social related impacts and opportunities. And to do this together, for example, with associated transition and adaptation plans through robust corporate reporting frameworks, and to support appropriate governance controls and assurance mechanisms. So these asks really work to reduce the reporting burden by streamlining requirements and promoting greater alignment and interoperability across established global reporting standards and frameworks, including frameworks like the ISSB, GRI, and ESRS. So now that you have that overview, looking forward to hearing your reactions and how this resonates with your countries. And I'll pass to Victoria now to lead that discussion. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you, Tess. So as mentioned, we're going to go into the interactive discussion now, and we are going to have a kind of some initial reflections on the approach and policy agenda as a whole, and then go through the 3 policy areas one by one, with different perspectives on those areas. In terms of initial reflections, we'd be keen to hear which of these 3 policy areas are of highest priority in your country, and also to hear how you're already working with businesses in your country, and how business can better support you to accelerate the scale up of sustainable land management. If any of the countries would like to speak, please raise your hand, and we'd be pleased to hear from you. And initially, Jean from Côte d'Ivoire, we'd very much welcome some thoughts from your side. Jean, are you there to share any reflections?
Oui, je suis là. J'avais du mal à ouvrir mon micro. Oui, nos perspectives sont bonnes. Et j'ai eu à le dire à l'entame de mes propos tout à l'heure. Nous croyons en cette initiative. Et voilà pourquoi nous, aujourd'hui, nous avons accepté d'être champions aux côtés de l'Allemagne. Seulement, nous avons quelques craintes au niveau des entreprises privées qui ont quand même de l'argent à injecter dans cette initiative et donc qui ont des conditions et peut-être que ces conditions-là pourront être un frein, un obstacle à leur installation. Seulement, nous sommes disposés à les aider à, à parvenir à s'installer et à faire de cette initiative les leurs et à développer la restauration des terres un peu partout à travers le monde entier. Parce que tout à l'heure, Claudia l'a dit, nous avons 40% des terres au niveau mondial qui sont dégradées et 60% des terres arabes qui sont dégradées. Donc, nous avons besoin de booster cette initiative de sorte que, appuyant les gouvernements, le secteur privé puisse nous amener à cette neutralité en matière de dégradation des terres qui pourrait, à l'horizon 2030, nous rapprocher ou même peut-être pas trop loin des objectifs que nous nous sommes fixés depuis quelques années. Donc, voici là ma réflexion et j'espère que beaucoup de gens partagent mon opinion que nous devrons tous être unis autour des gouvernants pour amener le secteur privé à s'impliquer durablement dans cette initiative. Merci.
Thank you, Jean. Really appreciate the reflections, and I do hope in terms of the conditions attached to some of the investments that this is a topic that can be part of a kind of further ongoing dialogue as we look towards our shared goals of delivering investments in sustainable land management and stronger public-private collaboration. I'd next like to bring in a private sector perspective. So we'd like to call on Monica representing Bayer to share perspectives as a company and as a company which is a business for land champion on the policy agenda as a whole. And then after that, we'll go into the three individual policy areas. Monica.
Yeah, thank you, Victoria, and thank you to both WBCSD and the UNCCD for having us. So as Victoria mentioned, I'm Monica McBride. I'm with Bayer in our crop science division, so focusing on agricultural inputs such as seeds and crop protection. So that's the lens that I'm bringing today. And I think it's very important to highlight that we sit at that part of the value chain, really working with growers and farmers and those land stewards as our primary customers, and really working to bring them innovative solutions to help enable them on their regenerative agriculture journey. And so just taking kind of a step back and reflecting on these policy areas, I think from our perspective, they are all incredibly important. And the first one, really creating that coherent and stable policy environment for a business like ours is incredibly important when we're thinking about bringing new products to the market that can take anywhere from 5 to 10 years to go through that regulatory process. And it really is important for us to have the certainty that all that investment in research and development and bringing products that we believe will help growers adapt to those changing environmental conditions, to changing pest pressures, to really helping them enable no-till or cover cropping will be accepted and brought forward at the end of the day. And so while a slightly different take maybe than where other businesses sit in terms of that stable policy environment, that for us is really kind of fundamental to being able to help manage the land sustainably and really help with that degradation aspect that's been brought up a few times. And then when I think about that long-term vision for financing, I think that is incredibly important as well. We are working with different companies, with the public sector as well, to try to figure out ways to stack capital to really help growers manage the risks and the burden that they take on in this journey of regenerative agriculture. A lot of the financial risk, right, sits at that part of the value chain. You're asking a grower to change practices, to also invest in potentially new equipment for that change in practice. And so they are taking on a very large financial burden and not necessarily going to see that return immediately or even in the first year or two. And so it's incredibly important that the public sector, the private sector, foundations, development banks really come together to stack capital to help the whole value chain see the benefits of, and the public sector see the benefits that are going to come to fruition by farmers adopting this. So I think that that's incredibly important for the public sector to play that role in financing and really being that initial tranche that can be at higher risk. And then finally, thinking about the alignment of frameworks and the importance of that. We, as a global company, operate in many different countries. We must abide by both voluntary and compliance standards in those countries. And every different standard that is out there that requires a different KPI or key performance indicator or metric or methodology to getting to that metric is taking away money, investments that we could be making in either research and development or working with our growers on the ground. So it's really important to think about what are you sacrificing when you are continuing to put in place new and different policy requirements for corporations, and where could that financing potentially be leveraged to bring more resources really to enable action and impact at scale on the landscape. So with that, I'll turn it back. But thank you, Victoria, for the opportunity to provide some reflections from the private sector.
Great, thank you, Monica. So we're next going to turn to policy area 1. So this is the policy area around having coherent and stable policies, looking at coherence across ministries, across between national and local levels, and internationally, which is where there's opportunities to align, which from the perspective of a multinational company working in different markets is also an important consideration. We have a couple of questions where we would welcome feedback and inputs. One is around where do you see the greatest opportunities to improve policy coherence and provide clear long-term signals? And the second is which policy reforms or coordination mechanisms have been most effective in aligning government priorities with private sector actions? And to kick us off in this area, I'd like to welcome Saskia, who is the UK national focal point, to share perspectives from the UK.
Hi everyone, thanks Victoria, and yeah, thank you so much for this call. So these findings strongly resonate with the UK's experience that sustainably managing land requires a whole systems approach, and that policy and fiscal incentives need to align with both economic and environmental outcomes. Really see the consultation highlighting areas that we need to address collectively under this first policy area. So clear, predictable and coherent policy frameworks are essential to sending the right signals to investors and businesses and unlock the long-term investment which is needed. And I think the findings highlight very well the fragmentation and misalignment across policy, data and finance systems, which acts as a big barrier to this. I'll touch on a few specific areas of the action points suggested. So given that land is what connects all of the different agendas from climate to nature, growth and food security, it seems to be where that fragmentation is most apparent, and you have ministries pursuing different mandates or incentives changing frequently over time. And this creates those mixed signals to the market, and that increases costs to businesses and farmers and slows progress ultimately of those shared goals. It'd be fantastic to hear kind of experiences of how others are navigating that. I like that the findings highlight integrated land use planning as a practical way to bring different sectors and actors together to have that shared vision and coordinated approach to land use, whether that's at the national or landscape level. And having that cross-sector narrative is key to trade-offs and aligning investment across different objectives like agriculture, forestry, water and mining. But that coordination is really tricky in practice. It requires that political leadership, the clear institutional mandates, sustained commitment across governments, but it also requires practical enablers such as interoperable data systems, shared metrics, and effective mechanisms for that collaboration to happen. And then it's also really good to see land governance recognised in the findings. For the UK, we see securing land rights and having robust land governance systems as a critical enabling condition for investment. And the UK has a dedicated global programme called the Land Facility, which provides support to governments to improve tenure security and unlock responsible and equitable land-based investment. And land governance is often integrated into the support we provide at country level on agribusiness investment. And above anything, this transition needs to work for the people who manage the land, whether that's farmers, Indigenous peoples, and local communities. They all need to be partners in designing solutions and not just the recipients of them. And their knowledge, rights, and livelihoods needs to be at the centre of decision making. Another area we're focused on in the UK is repurposing public support for agriculture. And there's that clear evidence that exists on the need to transition away from harmful subsidies towards a system that supports sustainable agriculture. But there's real challenges in delivering that reform, whether it's the short-term political horizons, dependency on subsidy regimes, and the limited access to finance for long-term investment. As the UK, we're trying to support a range of work to address these barriers. We work in partnership with the World Bank to provide support to governments to design and implement policy reforms. And then alongside this, we co-convene the Global Agriculture Policy Dialogue and regional dialogues. So these act as a peer-to-peer platform to share learning and build partnerships for policy design and implementation. And then we also work with our fantastic partner, Climate, supporting the high-level panel for a just rural transition. And this draws specifically on farmers' perspectives to inform recommendations for fair and credible policy pathways. It's very clear that across all of these areas, we need valuable engagement and co-creation with the business community. And it's really great to kind of hear experiences from businesses on this call. So yeah, thank you very much. Now I'll stop there.
Thank you, Saskia, both for your reflections on some of the recommendations and which align most closely with the UK priorities, as well as hearing a bit more about a couple of these key initiatives driving policy coherence, which the UK is leading. I'd like, before we go on to the next policy area, I just wanted to pause quickly to ask if anybody else, particularly from the national focal points, would be interested to take the floor. We can move to policy area 2 then. So this next policy area is actually, shall we bring in, perhaps we bring in a business perspective here as well. With Laura is on the call representing Unilever. Laura, would you like to share your perspectives on this need for stable and coherent policies?
Yes, and thank you very much, echoing the thanks beforehand to WBCSD and the UNCCD for the opportunity here. And just to situate Unilever in the conversation, we are a fast-moving consumer goods company, and therefore we see nature as critical infrastructure because we are entirely reliant on natural ecosystems and the services they provide for the water, for the raw materials we need for our products. And we've had long-standing commitments around avoided deforestation, regenerative agriculture, sustainable sourcing, protect and restore. But increasingly, we're recognizing that if we are to get to true resilience, which is what we need to work far beyond our individual footprint and look at those kind of collective action and collaborative opportunities within the wider value chain that previous speakers have spoken to. And I think this is where coherent, stable policy offers a huge opportunity to unlock more of that collective action because it, in our feeling, creates much more of an enabling environment in support of that transformative change. So things like leveling the playing field through regulation that means that companies that are taking the sustainable approach are not disadvantaged in the marketplace, that we create a mainstreaming of things like sustainable sourcing or deforestation-free commodities. I think the other piece that Monica was reflecting on earlier was around giving clear policy signals that give businesses the confidence for the long-term investments in innovation, in infrastructure that we know is necessary in this nature space. And I think the other area is around the incentives, which again has been spoken to before, but how with kind of clear policy frameworks, we can coordinate our investment, whether it's sort of through our kind of sourcing arrangements with farmers and aligning that with national extension services or finance or land governance policies to support the uptake of regenerative practices and ensure that the land stewards and farmers at the centre of this are supported throughout. And I think that's the piece that's so interesting. It's where we can kind of, I think someone said, nest corporate and sector-led initiatives within these national plans to ensure that there's real local governance and sustained impact beyond what an individual corporate project can achieve. And one of the examples we put in the report is around a project we're doing in Ecuador with Conservation International around mangrove restoration and conservation. And I think one of the interesting things here is our finance is being used to build the capacity of local communities to access state-backed AUSEM licenses that grant them access to manage and steward their mangroves. And it also enables them to access local incentives through the Forest Conservation Project. So offers a pathway to long-term sustained finance and community-owned solutions that go far beyond what we could achieve. And to kind of echo a previous speaker, our Unilever's initial investment allowed Conservation International, working very closely with the Ecuadorian government, to leverage additional finance from the Green Climate Fund to scale the project far beyond our initial investment. So demonstrating how that catalytic capital from the private sector can be stacked with additional forms of capital to provide for really, really impactful projects at scale. And I think that this kind of 3 COP year offers such a great opportunity to kind of take advantage of the synergies across the 3 agendas and offer different interfaces, access points, so that we can, as the private sector, better coordinate our activity and investment to support the delivery of NBSAPs and land use plans, and make sure that we are creating a sort of positive flywheel of investment and activity really grounded in local priorities. So thrilled to be part of the conversation and look forward to continuing engagement.
Great, thank you, Laura, for sharing that very, very concrete example around the power of collaboration, and also the need for or opportunity for continuity across the 3 COPs in this 3 COP year. We will now go to the second set of policy asks, and delighted to be hearing a farmer perspective here. So Katja, representing agri-food, we look forward to your comments and reflections and around this priority area, which is about how the finance aspects. What are the policy opportunities for co-investments and particularly for driving capital to farmers, local communities, and land managers, as well as the wider investments in the landscapes that we have touched on already through the discussion.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the organizers for convening this very interesting and important and timely dialogue. And as Victoria was mentioning, I represent agri-food. We are very happy to contribute, and just to explain a bit what is my perspective. So agri-food is a technical partner for farmers, organizations, and cooperatives, and we are currently working in around 55 countries in Latin America, some Caribbean islands, many countries in Africa, Southeast Asia, and we also collaborate with the Pacific Island regional farmers organizations, and our partner constituency is smallholders, predominantly family farmers, smallholders. So is that perspective, and maybe as a just first reminder that of course it is kind of self-evident, but sometimes it's a little bit forgotten that it's very important to recognize that within private sector you have many different kind of actors, and between smallholder farmer and Unilever there's the whole universe and so on, but that farmers themselves and smallholders are a big private sector in themselves, and big investors in landscape, so from this fair cost sharing and risk management, there are some good examples, and we very much welcome that this is strongly part of the recommendations in the paper, because it is, as Monica was also already, I echo her comments how farmers are often bearing a lot of the cost, even in the very poor countries. It's farmers who first have to invest and change the practices and so on. And there is now repurposing of subsidies in some countries, and as Matilda, I think it was Matilda who was mentioning that UK, for example, is supporting this in Malawi, and there are nice best practices coming out of this, but it does remain quite difficult, and even the subsidy delivery, sometimes the bottleneck is really in also a lack of soil testing capacities and things like that. So I think this is very important to also think really from the farmer's perspective, what kind of support they need, so that you don't just focus on shifting money for different type of fertilizer, for example, but that you create the whole ecosystem that is needed, that the farmer can then optimally use the things that are needed for improving soil health and working on land degradation. And also one thing that is lacking often is insurance mechanisms. So if there's really some kind of a catastrophic event that the farmer is losing all their harvest, this remains a challenge in many places, and there also some kind of a public-private collaboration is probably the only solution that is feasible. And when it comes to incentives, really additional income streams to help with the transition, we have been looking with our farmer organization and cooperative partners in a lot of different kinds of payment for ecosystem mechanisms, and it is still quite complicated to have them work in a smallholder context. So we are very much looking forward to experiences from compensation, GIZ program, that is piloting different ways to organize this, and we hope that something emerges from there, because I think to in a sustainable way to scale these activities, this type of income streams are also needed. So these are some points. And then talking about de-risking, I think it's very important to remember that it's not only about financial instruments and guarantee funds. It's I would say, even more about building trust between different types of actors, financing partners, governments, farmer organizations, and cooperatives, and bigger private sector actors. And there's no financial mechanisms that can replace this trust if it's not there. So that's also why I very much welcome this initiative to have this dialogue now within this decertification process, and that it's having its sister processes in all the different COPs, because I think it's very, very important that is one of the big de-risking mechanisms that we sometimes overlook, that the actors who are supposed to work on landscapes and make them more resilient, that there has to be trust between different types of actors, including also conservation actors and so on. And unfortunately, we still see too much polarization sometimes, which is blocking us from moving forward together. So in that also we see in many contexts that farmer organizations can really be a helpful mechanism also to build this trust, and also provide advisory services to farmers and facilitate access to finance and so on. So I would say that one way that that public sector can help then private investments come in is that if they strengthen this type of infrastructures, especially in let's say global south context, where there is a big smallholder sector, so that if you strengthen these kind of farmer groups, cooperatives and so on as institutions, I'm sure that helps also then other value chain actors to be more confident in investing in the smallholder sector and help the transition to scale. So I conclude here, and I'm curious to hear what others have to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Katja, and really appreciate the comments about the importance of trust and how building trust itself is something that needs investment, and can unlock the joint and collaborative investments that that a number of people have alluded to. Next, I would like to turn to Anke, who is representing Yara, to share her perspectives around this priority area too on co-investments.
Many thanks, UNCCD and World Business Council, for inviting me to this relevant exchange. It's more relevant than ever, I think. And just to introduce myself, I'm Anke Quast, Vice President, Regenerative Agriculture and Climate Frameworks in Yara International. And it's nice to see how aligned we are already. So I will try not to repeat what has been said before, but what I would like to point out is regeneration takes time, and especially as we are facing climate change, we should make the system also resilient, also the financial system. And we need clear, predictable, and harmonized long-term policy frameworks to strengthen the confidence for investing and also to provide the long breath we need to keep on going. When governments provide strategic direction on priority regions and landscapes, and that has been also addressed before, it defines basically where they intend to concentrate support and investment. And this is a very strong signal for the private sector actors, because we can align our efforts accordingly to create synergy on the ground. And by this, we are creating critical mass and attracting additional investments and generate synergies among also the different stakeholders, because regeneration is a co-creation process which requires many hands on deck. The farmer is in the center, but also the community needs to support, and policy and private sector are connected with it. So we need to work towards common goals on the same location and on the same segment that is relevant. And for fertilizer industry, from a fertilizer industry perspective, our core contribution lies in nutrient management and improving nutrient use efficiency with positive impact on environment, climate, soil health, while also supporting food security, farmer profitability, and land use efficiency. And achieving this requires balancing food security and farm profitability with the need to reduce nutrient losses and limit environmental impact and maintain long-term soil health. So what we need to reward the same outcomes, policy and private sector, and we need to speak with one voice to farmers. That is critical. A shared focus on common outcomes enables additional revenue streams for farmers, and it will also by this increase the resilience of farming. It will also accelerate action and investments while reducing overall monitoring, reporting, and verification and transformation costs. Because we will work all towards the same North Star, we want the same things. But the question is, how are we getting there? There's a lot of value in agreeing on appropriate ranges, for example, for nutrient use efficiency and nutrient surpluses that are both environmentally credible but also practically achievable. And while we need to address regenerative agriculture globally, we need to regionalize the approaches to define the thresholds. This needs to be informed by local agronomic, environmental, socio-economic, and policy conditions, including also the specific local food security needs and broader societal priorities. So the theory of change is that when policy and private sector objectives and incentives are aligned, the adoption becomes simpler, solution development and implementation will be encouraged, trust will be increased, and the effectiveness of the interventions will improve. So that is just our 5 pence from the fertilizer industry. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. And I think an important theme there as well around about the kind of regional specificity, and how we need the right context specific solutions that match with the national level priorities. In terms of this business policy agenda, which we've developed through this consultation approach, the framing very much is as universal asks that will need to be applied in different contexts in different ways. And so we really welcome feedback on how some of the priorities can align with national priorities, and where the most relevant parts are for different contexts. I will pause here to hear if anybody else would like to take anyone else would like to take the floor before we move on to the third policy area. Shall we move to the third area then? So this third area identified through the policy consultation process is around frameworks and data systems, which are fundamentally the core systems that companies are using for decision making. So we have two broad questions for discussion. One is, what information, metrics, and data systems are most needed to strengthen decision-making and investment in regenerative landscapes? And the second is, how can governments support more harmonized and trusted accountability and MRV systems while keeping them practical and accessible for users on the ground? So if you have any reflections on these topics, please feel free to put your hand up. And to kick off this area, I'm going to hand over to Chris from Danone to share some reflections on this topic, and perhaps any wider reflections on the discussion so far.
Thank you, Victoria, and hi, everybody. Chris Adamo, Global Sustainability from Danone. I will just give some quick context about how we operate as a food and beverage company, and how that pertains to some of these policy recommendations. Hopefully, I can give you some very precise examples of where these policy recommendations can not only help Danone, but it can help the sectoral-wide investment into the land sector and farmers specifically. If you don't know Danone, we are a global dairy company, but also partaking in many different agricultural commodities for our plant-based products, our specialized nutrition products, and other beverages that we manufacture and process around the world. But dairy is our number one most important commodity. And so as a result of that importance in that commodity, we've been investing in direct supply chains, which means direct farmer support, in about 20 countries around the world for dairy specifically. And I think what that I'd like to reflect in that are the different components we've had to build in to support farmers. And the kind of outcomes we're looking for is resiliency. It's improving soil health, it's decarbonizing or mitigating the actions on the farm, it's building in different resilience factors, such as around water. And so these activities and management practices that we're trying to support farmers with are critical, and some of these things have already been said already, but are reflected in the paper as well. We often have to build technical assistance support for the farmers that we work with, and we do it with other partners on the ground. We do it with cooperatives. There's a variety of ways we do it depending on the local situation, but these are investments that we have to make in order not just for the sustainability outcomes, but for the business resiliency around these farms. And we have to do it in a way that's farmer-centric, farmer-supportive, and around the types of activities that farmers ultimately want to implement. But technical assistance is absolutely key to that, and some governments have strong policies to support and others less so. But this is a key policy build-out that can complement the work that we do and ultimately scale the work across more farmers, not just in our supply chain, but across any sector in which we operate. The other thing that we often try to do is various forms of financial incentives for farms. And this has again been mentioned already. a bit, but so we have resources, but our resources are also scarce, just like any governments. So in ways that we can complement or bundle our resources with public funding means that we can provide more to the farms in which we work with, to cost share, to incentivize, and ultimately finance different types of activities that farmers want to do. Again, whether it's crop practices, whether it's manure management practices, whether it's investments in genetics at the dairy herd. It's a variety of different practices we look at, but these different financial incentive mechanisms, which again are not novel in most cases, but again, we have to be creative in how we put together the resources at different localities. And then perhaps a third component I'll put out, and this pertains to the third area of the paper more so, is standards. And again, standards are really just a body of paper in the eyes of most farmers. Again, the standard doesn't matter. It's the type of practices that we're trying to implement. But oftentimes we're running into inconsistencies from one region to another, or different standard bodies from one to another. So it's one reason we've invested a lot in the Sustainable Agriculture Initiative, otherwise known as SAI. This is a nonprofit body that we've been co-leading for over 5 years, and happy to partner with WBCSD on ultimately the maturity and the promotion of this standard within government policy where it makes sense. And it's really an opportunity for governments to have a strong reference point of what companies like us and many farmers around the world are already working towards, and hopefully an opportunity that they can build off of so that we don't need to recreate new standard bodies. We can use and leverage what's already out there. This is a really important piece, not just for farmers, but for companies like us. And so we can all be ideally working off similar frameworks that are harmonized from one region to another. And still while allowing farmers that flexibility to implement local practices that matter most for them. It's not a prescriptive-based standard, but often an outcome-based standard, which is key, especially for the farmers to have the flexibility to choose what works best for them. Victoria, I'm happy to go into any other specific areas in free, but maybe I'll leave it there for questions.
Great, and thank you for drawing attention to the importance of the SAI Regenerating Together framework, recently launched a couple of weeks ago, and which is really showing a kind of increasing business alignment around what comprises regenerative agriculture. Would anybody like to come in here or ask any questions before we head on to the closing remarks and next steps? In particular, if there are any of the countries that have reflections or questions. I think we can go on to the next steps then. So the next steps are well, first of all, thank you very much for everybody for this discussion. I think what we're hearing is it's this greater dialogue between public and private sectors around this shared agenda of sustainable land management, addressing land degradation, investing in regenerative landscapes is more needed than ever, and so highly appreciate everyone's participation today on both the government and the business sector side, and we really hope this will be the beginning of a conversation. So yes, we look forward to that continuing. In very concrete terms, we will circulate the paper and then overview of the methodology after the call. So that will come from the UNCCD Business for Land team, and again, continue to welcome reflections on it. On the business side, we will be inviting businesses and financial institutions to endorse a short high-level statement that supports the broad direction of the of this policy agenda, and it'll be the statement that we release alongside the report at COP17. So yeah, for businesses, there will be an opportunity to support that. And yeah, I think we have been in touch with a lot of the companies about this already. And then in terms of COP17, really look forward to the chance to meet more of you in person and to continue to discuss these important topics going forward. So thank you from WBCSD, and thank you again, of course, to our co-hosts for today, for Germany and Côte d'Ivoire, and to the UNCCD Business for Lands team for driving this collaboration. And I will hand back over to Sarah from UNCCD to give some closing remarks.
Yeah, thank you very much, Victoria. So thank you all for attending, and thank you actually for the interpreters who have been there with us today for both sessions. We have had the chance to have the 5 UN languages, and that has been helping us to understand each other. So thank you, interpreters. So as we come to the close of today's webinar, I would like to extend, of course, my sincere thanks to all the speakers, the participants, and I believe it has been a very constructive and thoughtful webinar. I would like especially to thank our co-chairs, the UNCCD Party champions, Côte d'Ivoire and Germany, the World Business Council on Sustainable Development, who has been working for many months on developing those recommendations with their network. And we are very happy to see it coming to a concrete realization now and to be able to share that with our parties. One of the strengths of UNCCD process is its ability to bring together diverse perspectives in support of a common objective. And today's exchange has offered an opportunity for the private sector to present its propositions to accelerate the restoration of agricultural lands and support the sustainable management of land, soil, and water. This webinar demonstrated the value of creating space for dialogue between parties and the private sector. And it is just the beginning, as it is actually increasingly important for the implementation of our convention and its future strategic framework. Looking ahead to COP17 in less than a month now, this conversation does not end. During the Business for Land Forum, we are planning a formal handover of the recommendations together with our party champions, Germany and Côte d'Ivoire, and you are most welcome to join. Moreover, we'll have an in-depth public-private dialogue where parties following this webinar and following the reading of the recommendations will be able to provide their statements and recommendations, and also to discuss how can we move this agenda forward beyond COP17. So once again, thank you for taking the time to join us today. We greatly appreciate your engagement, and we look forward to see you in Ulaanbaatar in a month. Thank you very much. Have a good day.
No, Sarah.
Oui,
Sarah.
vous voulez dire un dernier mot?
Oui, un dernier mot quand même à l'endroit de nos partenaires du privé. Alors, nous savons tous que il y a 3 conventions de Rio. Il y a la convention sur la diversité biologique, la convention sur le changement climatique, et la dernière née, c'est la nôtre, la convention sur la désertification et la sécheresse. Et il est de notoriété que nous sommes une convention assez pauvre. Et voilà pourquoi nous vous sollicitons pour une présence assez efficace, assez effective lors de ces COP-là. Parce que, par exemple, dans nos pays, nos différents pays, il est focalisé et tout ce qui concerne le climat, tout le monde est focalisé là-dessus. Mais quand il s'agit de la lutte contre la dégradation des terres, la sécheresse et la désertification, nous sommes les parents pauvres. Donc, aidez-nous à être présents et cela pourra peut-être booster aussi votre présence sur le terrain. Donc, vous avez nos contacts, vous pouvez nous joindre à tout moment pour nous dire comment vous pouvez nous aider. Je vous remercie. Merci, Sarah.
C'est moi qui vous remercie, Jean. Un grand merci, notre champion de la Côte d'Ivoire. Sur ces mots, donc je vous souhaite une bonne fin de journée et à très bientôt. Merci à tous. Au revoir.